What made you quit a job on the spot? Nothing dramatic. After working my ass off during the pandemic and promised an additional bonus, I received a low performance review conveniently timed a day before my bonus was to be paid. The low performance feedback cancelled my bonus. Given all the other bullshit I was putting up with, I broke and quit. I had a nice month off, and my new job pays significantly more. Never work for people that don't appreciate you, there are always others that will. My grandfather, who I considered like a father, passed away after a long stay in hospital. We were closer than he was with his own kids, and our bond was quite special. I spoke to my manager about getting the day of his funeral off, since I was organizing part of the arrangements and having a day or two of bereavement leave, and he agreed. The day of the funeral finally comes, and the staff start calling me, leaving me messages asking why I'm not at my shift, and telling me, well, I'm in a suit hosting family members at the funeral home, that I have to find someone to replace me or face repercussions. Needless to say, I told them to figure it out and never looked back. Walked into the interview, everything went well, accepted the job offer. Went to the front desk to do the paperwork and noticed that the contract had a different pay amount and that I would be interning for the first month for $100 a week. I asked first about the amount difference, was told, oh, this the standard contract, it just hasn't been updated for your specific offer. I told them they'd need to edit and initial the changes before I would sign. Oh, that's not how things work here. I thanked them for their time and left without signing anything. They called me back on the day I was supposed to have started asking where I was. I told them, because didn't sign the contract, I was never an employee. Oh boy, that was a fun call. I worked for T-Mobile store, authorized reseller, not an actual dealer. 1 week, I had an amazing week, sold 55 phones, brand new activations on a business account with 55 high-end phones at that time. When I got my next check, they said my paperwork was not in order, and thus they couldn't pay me. As a side note, they always told us to make copies of all paperwork in case this happened, so you can show it to the manager and get it resolved within a day. I went over my backup paperwork with my boss. He said everything looked to be in order, and he would have the office cut me a check. I went to the office, and they told me it was still not in order. I immediately gave them my store key and quit on the spot. I did go through collections and they did settle before I took them to court. The company did go out of business after a few years because they tried that with many other employees and eventually lead to an investigation by the government, according to an old coworker I bumped into years later. Worked as a cashier in a local shop. One night 2 guys came at me with knives, trying to get in the till. I just walked away and said have at it, as it wasn't worth the minimum wage to get into it with a couple of guys waving knives at me. After they ran out the store, I picked up my mobile and called the police, then called the store manager. Next day, the district manager meets me as I turn up for my shift the very next day. Her first words were it was very unprofessional of me to be on my phone while in work. I laughed at her and told her she could take this as my notice and walked out. I never had a problem with being held up, but the sheer gall of that got me. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. We used to get a free McDoubler hot and spicy with a small fries and drink for our lunch break. One day when I went on break, the franchise owner was there, and when he noticed I asked for cheese on the hot and spicy, he attempted to make me pay for the whole meal because cheese wasn't free. I thought he was joking, so I laughed and started walking towards the break room until he yelled at me not to walk away from him in front of customers and my coworkers. I couldn't believe it, this grown-ass successful businessman was hounding at 16-year-old for a slice of cheese. Told him I wasn't gonna pay, put the food down and walked out. They tried calling me to come to work that weekend. I told them no thanks and never went back. Lol, I had an inside hint from HR that there was about to be mass layoffs, and my name was on the list. I scheduled my week-long vacation, and returning the day before layoffs were presumed to have happened. My boss reamed me out for daring to take a vacation. She said I would never advance in the company if I chose such a formative time in a project to take a vacation. She told me I would never be an executive producer if I went on a vacation before project launch, even though I wouldn't be able to touch it for the week I was away anyways, and that I would always be known in the television industry as lazy. I chilled, took my vacation, and returned. She was mad and said that she was upset with me for having left and made her take care of my project for me. Chewed me out in front of the entire company in the conference room. I chilled and was like, aren't you laying off a bunch of us tomorrow? I'm just waiting for you to fire me so I can collect unemployment. Entire room literally starts panicking, and management tries to understand how the fuck I knew about layoffs. It was my one true Regina George causing chaos moment. I am a physician assistant and took a job at an urgent care. After working there for about a month, I noticed some irregularities, such as some medications being expired and sometimes a lack of supplies. I wrote that off as the office manager not being as astute as she should have been and brought it up to the doctor who owned the place. He said he would talk to her and straighten it out. Then one of the medical assistants came to me and said, "You know this has been going on forever, right?" She then said that things would never change and to get used to it because the expired medications had been on the shelf for months and they were told to never throw them out. She then also told me that the autoclave, the machine that sterilizes instruments, was broken and all they did was wash the instruments in soap and water and put them in the autoclave anyway to get them as clean as possible. That was the end of that. I made out a formal complaint to the state medical board and never showed up again. The state actually came in the very next day and raided the place. They shut him down immediately. They found so many things wrong that not only did they keep the place out of business, they suspended his license. He was also prosecuted on federal charges because he was running a scam for truck driver physical exams. Worked for a restaurant pub. The owner would come in with his buddies for hours at a time, a lot of times forcing the bartender to stay way past close serving them. Obviously was told not to charge anything because it's the owner's party. After hours of drinks on the house, no tip. Not even from the owner. This started to happen frequently. Usually we'd put up with it if they'd leave or be done before close. Then we started hearing that the kitchen staff hadn't been paid in a month. Bartenders were being paid because we made like $4 an hour. But the kitchen wasn't a tipped kitchen and made a decent wage. Turns out the owner was a total drunk fuckwit, which should have been obvious, and buried himself in debt. A week later we were told our checks weren't there on the day they were supposed to be. Then 2 days later still no checks. I told them, if my check wasn't there tomorrow, I won't come in for my shift. They said it came. I got there, and they said, well, what I meant was it's actually on the way. I talked to the, and I walked out. I later found out no checks were ever issued there again. They tried to pay some people cash, but it fell apart very soon after. Edit. For those guessing the place, this was about 12 years ago, and it went out of business not too long after I left. Someone else bought it, renamed it, and made it work, and now I believe it's still there and operating quite well. I was at a company for about a year and a half as an assistant project manager. In that year and a half, I had 3 different bosses, the newest one being a heavy micromanager. I was getting paid about 20% below the standard salary for the position, overworked without any additional compensation, and the overall culture of the company was just flawed. My boss started nitpicking my work at the end of the day. I told her I had plenty of time to get it done before the end of the day, but she kept pushing and escalating. She was borderline screaming, and I just cut her off and said, "I'm not doing this shit anymore, I quit." She yelled back, "Well, I need it in writing," and I said back with the straightest face, "I don't have to do shit in writing." I quietly packed all my stuff up, said good luck to my coworkers, and left. A year later, after working a couple of other jobs, I accepted a project manager position with a competing company and make almost twice as much as I was making at the previous. And I get to post on Reddit while at work without getting yelled at. Fun times. Working at a grocery store when I was a teenager. I was still out on my own, but working anything I could to make ends meet. I guess I didn't work hard enough being a one-man crew in front of a store manager who decided to tell me to go faster, impossible, and do even better for my 4.25 per hour. I tried explaining I was going as fast as personally possible when he decided to say, "You'll do what you are told, as fast as you're told if you want to keep this job. You should be so lucky." Decided right then and there, bro, I'd rather starve than work for some stupid fuck whose high point in life is the assistant manager at a buy low grocery store. Quit on the spot. Edit. Holy jeez. Never expected this to blow up this fast or like this at all. That being said, never compromise your self-worth for a job. You're worth more than that, and you should bet on yourself always. The boss wanted my team to work extra shifts without weekends to finish a project next milestone so we can show the client that we are capable of finishing before the due date. We worked 14 hours daily for 4 weeks with no weekends, and the last 2 days we worked for 36 hours straight with no break since the due date was a day to one way. Everyone was fucked and on the edge, no smiles, no small talks, nothing. And we don't get paid overtime. After finishing the milestone, he thanked us and called us for a meeting saying we have to continue working like this for an unknown period until they hire new staff members. I refused with another colleague and said we will work for what we get paid for, which is 9 hours per day 5 days a week. He didn't take us seriously, but we didn't give a fuck at that moment. We worked the next 2 weeks accordingly. He called us and said that he was extremely disappointed and that we don't value the company. I walked out, collected my stuff, faced my resignation letter to the HR and said bye. I worked as a pizza delivery driver in undergrad. I normally did the evening shift at a small chain pizzeria about 15 minutes off campus. I always made sure that the schedule let me go before close since I had 8 a.m. Hindi classes every morning. However, the manager never had enough drivers on shift. So, even if my schedule said I was out at 9 p.m., I'd rarely get to punch out before 10:30 p.m. or 11 p.m. On any night I had a date and told the manager I'd have to leave on time. He looked me in the eye and said, "We'll see about that." I left and didn't come back. Similarly, another local pizzeria was notorious for its strict management. One of the shift managers was prone to having temper tantrums and could often be heard screaming at line cooks or shrieking at servers. My car broke down on St. Patrick's Day when I was scheduled to work. I had to pay $50 to get it towed home, and I called in to tell the manager what happened. He yelled at me and accused me of making up excuses to go out and drink. I offered to show him the receipt and repair bill, and he just hung up the phone. A day later, he called me and said, "We're cool, but you owe me a shift." I told him that I couldn't take more shifts because I was a full-time student, and he said he didn't care. I went in on my next scheduled shift, picked up my paycheck, and told the nearest manager that I quit. The latter pizzeria was genuinely and generally terrible. The owner got a real kick out of the time he went outside and fired every driver whose delivery sign wasn't lit up by sunset. He also flouted minimum wage laws and didn't adequately compensate tip drivers who failed to earn their $7.40 per hour. If only I'd been a bit older and thought to report them.